Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. The series is India's. Despite a brief scare either side of lunch on day 4, they win by 5 wickets at Ranchi to take the series with 1 game to play. I'm Yas Rana, and with me this morning are Mark Butcher and Ben Gardner. Butch, 3-1 India with 1 test to go. Looking at the initial reaction in England, there are some who are saying, well, it's the same scoreline as 2021. India don't have Kohli, Pant, Shami, no Bumrah for this test match. England should have done better. There are others saying that actually England have been in this series for most of the day's plays. They've been in with a shot, and they're there without Brook, without Leach, and a historically inexperienced attack. They've done pretty well. Yeah. Where on that line do you sit?
I'm very much towards the latter. I mean, anybody sort of rewinding back to our pre-test series podcast will know that, you know, the idea that it could get very, very ugly on the trip was very much at the forefront of all of our minds, given England's preparation, England's lack of experience in the spin bowling department, the fact that a lot of the players hadn't played any sort of meaningful cricket since the end of the Ashes last year. You know, it had all of the ingredients to be a massacre, and it hasn't been that. The third test obviously was massively disappointing, and I thought it garnered a reaction that wasn't warranted. Really, I think it was a massive overreaction to England getting knocked over in that final innings. And I think they've done themselves a lot of credit. I really do. I mean, I've been imagining how the series might have played out had England been, still under Root and Silverwood playing in the way that they had done, under that regime. And I can't see it having been any different. And barring brilliance from Joe Root, which is what won them that first test match in Chennai 4 years ago, the rest of it was a massacre. And this has been anything but. Of course, there have been periods of time over the course of particularly the last 2 test matches where England sort of had the game, had the whip hand, had the upper hand and the best of the conditions, particularly this one having won the toss, and perhaps didn't quite have the quality to nail it down where better and more experienced sides might have done. But having said all of that, I think it was a heck of a test match. And once again, England have shown enough fight, enough skill, and enough real promise in the likes of somebody like Bashir, who has been unbelievably impressive. There are better things to come. However many years away the next India series is, they will be better placed and have bit more experience and players with more than a handful of first class games under their belt to go out there and do better the next time. So I think that it's been brilliant to watch, and the result of the 3-1 has been entirely expected. I mean, anybody that tells you any different is completely deluding themselves.
I guess there's an idea. People don't like seeing positions of dominance slip, and in the third test match, there was something very obvious to point to as the moment when the test started going in India's favour, that Root reverse scoop that didn't work out. Here, India were 177 for 7, responding to 350 odd, and the game very quickly slipped away from England. There's almost a sense that people almost want to attribute moral failure in letting a position of dominance slip away. It didn't really. It felt different to Rajkot in that England didn't actually do a lot wrong. India played really well to get back into the game.
Yeah, they did. And I think that's the thing, you can say India are missing some first choice players. The guys who've had come in are really pretty good. Like, I know Akash Deep, his test is basically done with inside the first hour on the first morning, but he's already taken 3 massive wickets and given India a pretty good start after losing the toss. Dhruv Jurel starts the series as India's 5th choice wicketkeeper, and he looks like some player and so good that actually you wonder when Rishabh Pant is back, if they are missing people, has he moved up the pecking order just as a specialist bat? I mean, he was that good and exceptional on the final day in particular. For me, the bit where, I guess, if you're looking for what England did wrong in the bits when India did a lot right, on that second evening, you're wondering whether they got the exact bowling combination right. Like, Bashir had bowled an absolute marathon. Was he getting a bit tired? Tom Hartley, this wasn't his best game. Hyderabad was clearly his best game, but and so you wonder whether they could have gone back to seam then, just put a bit of a lid on it rather than the fight back starting there. But I think
there was a flat period where Kuldeep and Jurel batted for 18 overs at the end of that day, and then 15 overs at the start of the next day, and that lead went from 170 odd to about less
60,
than 100 actually.
But I think for me, almost the bigger missed opportunity maybe is England's third innings, and just a little passage that probably starts just before tea with Stokes getting out to another one that keeps low. And obviously there's no way of knowing what's discussed in the dressing room between that and the start of the next session, if anything, or if it's just players seeing it and reacting to it. But the next 3 wickets England lost suggested to me that they had felt that survival was kind of no longer possible on this pitch. Bairstow chips his first ball to cover. Chips his first ball out, having, that looked like an intent thing that he was like, right, I'm going to hit out before I get out. Tom Hartley again, he gets caught playing a big shot. Robinson wasn't out playing a big shot, but had basically been out twice before that, could have been. And then actually Folkes and Bashir play very stoically for a long time. And with how this pitch seemed to play throughout the game, Stokes attributed it to the temperature throughout the day, that it was colder in the morning and in the evening, and it was between that it was actually a lot tougher to play. So if England could have got to stumps even 8 down, and then it resumes the next morning, it's a bit easier, and then they get through, maybe you eat a bit into that day, you just chew up a bit of that easier batting time, and you're probably got a few more runs that way as well. I think that would have been a much, much stronger position. Obviously, batting a bit longer, you'd be in a strong position, but it looked to me like a few players had decided after tea, there's nothing for it. We're gonna have to hit out, or we'll be out soon enough anyway. And actually, first Folkes and Bashir, and then Jaiswal and Rohit, and then even Jurel and Jurel and Gill showed what was possible in terms of survival, not in terms of scoring. So I think that those would be the 2 little bits of missed opportunity that I think you see from an England point of view.
But how would you have gone about batting on a pitch like that? Because it was really weird. On day one, you get that shooter from Jadeja to Stokes, and you're thinking at that point, well, if it's like this on day one, what the hell is it going to be like on day 3, day 4 if it gets that far? And there were moments of inconsistent bounce throughout the Test match, but they didn't necessarily become more frequent. There looked like periods where batting wasn't necessarily easy, but there weren't too many demons in the pitch. What was the secret to survival? And what's it like as a batter, knowing that there are going to be balls, not with your name on it, but balls that won't get off the ground at all? Because it looked like some players were able to almost put those balls out of their mind.
Well, Joe Root, the way Joe played in the first innings, really. A lot of players, and they're right to do so, will be trying as much as they possibly can to stay back, get the pads out of the way, try and play with a straight bat and manipulate the ball from there. But obviously this was a pitch where you needed to tend towards getting forward and playing straight, really. I mean, kind of it's pretty old-fashioned, and the pitch required that. And of course, then you do that, particularly against England's spin bowlers, and you kind of figure to yourself that if you go long enough without them making breakthroughs, or without you donating wickets to them, then you're going to get bad balls every once in a while. With the exception of Bashir, England's other 2 spin bowlers were unable to quite keep a lid on it in the way that India's did. I mean, Ashwin was magnificent, wasn't he, in England's third innings? And so was Kuldeep. But you'd expect that, wouldn't you? I mean, these guys are magnificent spin bowlers playing at home, and they exploited the conditions quite perfectly. So, I mean, batting wasn't impossible for sure, but it wasn't easy to be sort of freewheeling in that sense. And I suppose we got a bit of a window into how things might have gone had England not been quite as aggressive as they had been in the first 2 or 3 Test matches, whereby if you sit there for long enough, they knock you over. You go nowhere and they knock you over. So it kind of vindicates the way that England have decided to play. And the interesting thing for me is that the outcome is probably not going to be any different depending on which way you go about it. The only difference being that on more than one occasion over the course of the first 4 Test matches, India have had to really sweat. They've not been donated a victory. You could say they were donated the victory in Rajkot in the third game, but they were battered into submission by brilliant batting from Jaiswal, and aren't the first and won't be the last team to fall over and heap in the last innings on a Turner in India.
Well, this is the thing. How much do you think you can compare how the 2 batting units go about things? Because what they're coming up against is totally different. Jadeja basically never bowls a bad ball. Tom Hartley's just starting his first class career, let alone his Test career. Ashwin's taken 500 wickets, and Kuldeep Yadav's probably the most exciting wrist spinner we've seen in the last 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you're comparing apples with oranges, aren't you? In fact, sort of alien species with humans at times. So I find it very hard. You know me. I don't mind putting the boot in when it's warranted, but I don't really see any reason to sort of have a massive go at the England team. I said after the Rajkot game that I would rather be in a dressing room that sees the game the way that this England team do after a defeat like that than one that sort of that is hand wringing and castigating itself for mistakes, and I think it was shown up in this Test match that they gave themselves opportunities to be in the ascendancy, to maybe even win the game, and even they get the 5 wickets down in that run chase, and you're still believing that there's a chance that they might somehow manage to pull a rabbit out of the hat, and it's huge testament to Gill. And to Jarrell that 72-run partnership made it look so easy in the end, because it was anything but.
And just India were just absolutely exceptional across the last 2 days of these last 2 Test matches. Like I know it's spread out by England doing okay, but like you won't see sides play better in Test cricket than that, really, from batting, bowling, everything. To go from
9 out of the 11 Indian players in this Test match put forward really significant contributions.
Yeah, and then to go from a Rajkot, a position where your game's in the balance, to your biggest ever Test win, and to go in this Test from a position where you're thinking like not just the path of victory is narrow, you're thinking 170 for 7, so 180 behind on a pitch that is like, or you're already thinking that's going to be hard to chase in the last innings. To go from that to in the end a 5-wicket win. They had to play perfect cricket, and they did that basically. Like it was this, and I think that obviously we're starting from an England point of view, and you can almost always also take, look back at India's home dominance and all kind of blend into one and think like, well, yeah, they beat those teams at home because they're India. They've got the most sources, most people, conditions help them, that sort of thing. But that can mean you can just take it for granted in a way that you shouldn't, and neglect the brilliant cricket that they play. And that to me feels like the story we should always be celebrating. A team that is coming towards the end of that period, but also with how some of the younger players played, no reason why they can't sort of found at least the next dominant home period, and then see what they can do overseas, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. It's not the same India team that's had the home dominance that they've had. Jaiswal, Jarrell, Akash, Sarfaraz have all made significant contributions so far this series. What do you think helps create an environment where young players feel comfortable, able to play their natural game and sort of find that success from minute one? Because I thought in particular Jarrell, it's not just he did well in this Test, he sort of played the role of a senior figure in the way he managed different situations very well.
Yeah, it was the 2 brilliant knocks. You speak to both management groups, really. Their messaging might be slightly different, but I think in terms of allowing young players responsibility to make their own decisions, to play their way, to make them feel as though they are absolutely vital cogs in the entire package of India or England being successful in Test matches, is huge. I don't get the impression that Stokes treats Bashir any differently to the way that he would treat Jimmy Anderson, and I get the same impression with the Indian team. I mean, Rahul Dravid is in the terrific position, and again, this is kind of legacy thinking, I suppose, from India. Rahul looked after all these guys as a very successful Indian under 19 team who have all sort of come through, and they're now playing underneath him in the Test team as well. The backing that they've given to somebody like Shubman Gill, I mean, the knives are out for him early on in the season, but we've all seen how talented a player he is. And sticking with players, England sticking with people like Crawley and Duckett and whatever it might be through thick and thin, giving your young, inexperienced players an early go with the ball and not hiding them away and then throwing them the ball when they're under the most pressure. All of those types of things are very important in terms of making people feel at home and comfortable in the environment. And let's not forget, playing for India is a very different thing to playing for anybody else. Let alone having to come into the side and replace somebody like Kohli, or Deep having to come in and replace Bumrah. The pressure that these guys are under is like nothing that any England player has ever experienced. And to come in and play as well as they have done, and to look at home and as comfortable as they've done, it's a huge testament to that management. And you could also say, look, they're not. They haven't been out there facing sort of like the world's most experienced and best spin bowling attack, and therefore, things are a little bit less tricky for them. But I think match situations that Jurel in particular has found himself in twice in this Test match and has come out the other side beaming. Gives you a clue as to how good a player he is and how good that environment is.
And it's easy to forget as well, Rohit was under a bit of pressure going into this series. Under his captaincy, India hadn't been quite as dominant recently as people, I think, presumed that they had been. There were murmurings, especially after Hyderabad, that if things don't go well for India in the next couple of games, it could be the end of Rohit's captaincy. So an absolutely huge series for him on a personal level.
Yeah, and he's got back to form with the bat as well. I mean, it was a weird stat going around, actually. This was his highest ever fourth innings Test score in this game when he made 55, which is, for a guy who's now got 4,000 Test runs. But that was a 55 that was also worth plenty more in other situations. So yeah, he's captained really well, and obviously Stokes gets more of the credit because there's a lot of active stuff going on. There's field change almost every ball at times, especially when you're defending a low total. And there have been times you can look at Rohit and say he's been a bit passive or he's possibly missed a trick here and there. But with how India have rallied in both those games, a lot of credit for that has to go to the captain as much as, the players themselves deserve the credit for putting in the performances. Like to I think, and then maybe that's that calmness coming to the fore a bit as well, possibly a bit of perspective saying like, no, we're doing okay here. We're like, we're either, if we do this, we can get back into the game, we're okay, or we just need to stick to what we're doing and we'll be all right. And actually, that calmness can sometimes look like passivity, but I think, and it did at Hyderabad when you had, Pope playing in that way, and it looked like he didn't really have an answer to it, but there are strengths and weaknesses to both approaches, and that's come now. And he's in an interesting position because he's 37 years old. You don't get very many 37-year-old all-format captains. And yet he still looks kind of, and he also, if you were just to sort of look at him based on, his manner and the way he deals with the press and the way he's around players, you wouldn't pin him out in the same way as you would Kohli as this like ultra-driven sort of competitor in the same way. He's not the one who's sort of like hooting and hollering after each wicket or ball beating the bat or whatever.
He looks like a guy who sleeps well.
Yeah, exactly. but deep down, I think he's as steely as any of them. And, we've seen that with how he's adapted to batting in overseas seam-friendly conditions. Like that would have taken a lot of hard work, a lot of sort of like reflection and time to think about, do I even want to be doing this? Because, he doesn't need to be really good in England conditions to be, a great Indian cricketer, but he's gone away and focused and done that. And then now he's still, he's got, I guess maybe it's the ICC event thing, the fact that he hasn't really won one. So if he can, while that carrot is still there, he'll want to be driven to do all the things. There's still a chance for World Championship next year. There's a T20 World Cup coming up. The home World Cup will have hurt, and maybe that is the thing that is still driving him on. But it's amazing that it is, considering the age that he's at and all the cricket that he's played, and the fact that that team is sort of drifting away. He's the one that is now sort of still sticking there.
I feel like passive is a word that people misuse quite a lot. They sort of conflate it with being defensive, but actually I think Rohit's been pretty proactive in dropping men deep as the series has gone on, sort of cutting off the scoring options that England want to have. But we've not really talked about him that much so far, but Shoaib Bashir had an amazing Test match, 8 wickets across the game. I thought it was striking how much control he had when the pitch wasn't doing a lot, but also how threatening he was to right-handers. I feel like over the last 5-10 years, increasingly, even in Test cricket, there's more and more match-up chat that left arm spinners can only get right-handers out and vice versa with off-spinners. How good an off-spinner do you think he is now, already in his career?
I think he's a very good one, yeah. I think the control element is fascinating because, again, when you use the word inexperience, or you talk about somebody that has so little cricket behind them, you're kind of expecting from English spinners full stop. You're expecting a bad ball and over. I mean, how long has it been taken for Jack Leach somebody who's played as much cricket as he has to get to a point where you think he could rack up 2, 3, 4 maidens on the trot. So that's been fantastic. The other thing about him, and this is the thing that got him the pick in the first place, I guess, is that he hits the bat really hard. There are times when he bowls, it looks like a drag down delivery, and it whacks into the top of the bat. Like just kicks and bounces. He doesn't give away sort of easy pull balls. He doesn't get cut by the right handers, which is a huge thing. I think the one thing that will come in terms of his development is a little bit more guile in terms of getting the ball to maybe drift away from the right hander, try and beat him on the outside. But I thought he was fantastic, and to have the confidence of saying but we're going to bowl him out tomorrow as well. He seems to have just slotted in, to be a real part of the team, and to sort of feel his own value in the side incredibly quickly. So look, really, really impressive. There are no downsides to speak of whatsoever, and the thing that you hope is that he manages to get plenty of bowling when he comes back to England in the early part of the season, and that that England sort of think about him as somebody who's not only going to play in subcontinent conditions when you need 2 spinners.
Well, this is the thing, with the way he bowled in this Test match, I think it's feasible for him to be playing home Test matches quite soon.
Yeah, for sure. Again, the sort of like the off spinner versus right handers argument and all the rest of it, and needing to have somebody that takes the ball away from the bat. But Nathan Lyon, there you go. There's a name for you. And perhaps then England start thinking about, well, can we get a left arm seamer into our Test match lineup to try and give him something to work with days 3 and 4, 5 with foot marks and all that kind of things, and it gives you another element to your bowling attack to have that. So look, incredibly positive, and perhaps we'll just leave it at that. Very, very young, great to see, and hopefully he has another good Test match in Dharamshala.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that the more he bowls, I almost think that Key and Co deserve less credit because he's doing so well that actually you can completely see why they went for him. I just wanted to ask, what's it like from a batting perspective against a spinner who gets that extra bounce? What's the additional challenge? Because it felt that actually, even compared to the other tall spinners in this Test match, Ashwin and Hartley, he was able to get that additional, as well as Ashwin bowling the second.
Yeah, the two things are that you don't get a lot of sort of easy floaty drive balls, and also it makes him difficult to get down the pitch to because the angle into the ground is so much steeper. So you don't feel like you can get underneath him. And it makes sweeping difficult too. I know the Indian batters don't really use the sweep in the same way that England batters do, and Australian batters don't do it very much either. But if you were thinking about sort of sweeping the crap out of somebody like Bashir, and he's got the right set field, you'd bring in top edges into play. It's also quick enough through the air to sort of slide one underneath you. So there are lots and lots of advantages of what he does, and it seems very natural to him. It's not something that it's not something that he's having to adapt to Indian conditions to be able to bowl in that manner. That's how he bowls. Much like somebody like Monty back in the day, when Monty was on song and he was impossible to get down to and really put a heavy rev on the ball, hit the top of the bat when you were defending. And all of those attributes are very, very handy to have.
You were going to say something?
Well, yeah, just that you could make a case for all 4 of those spinners that England have used on this tour to be first choice back in home conditions. They all bring something different to the table, but something you can see being valuable, not just in India, but outside of it. But then also on Bashir, I know I don't want to be the Englishman now that England have lost in India, looking forward to the next huge away series in the Ashes. But I think the comparisons to Nathan Lyon are quite interesting because his big threat in Australia is that overspin that he gets, right? That he gets over the ball, that it's the bounce often as much as the turn that he gets. And you look at Bashir and wonder, like, obviously they're in some ways they're very different, obviously it ends their careers, but could he be a Nathan Lyon type bowler? I know that Nathan Lyon is great at the game, Bashir is just starting out, but I wonder if there are similarities there that will make England interested in when it comes to that tour.
Their professional records before making their Test debuts are pretty much identical. Lyon played.
Was he ever a groundsman?
No. Not that we know of.
No, okay.
I guess he didn't have time to. But Bashir obviously 6 games, 10 wickets at 67. Lyon was 6 games, 12 wickets at 47 or something like that. I really like how calm he is when they're wondering whether or not to review something. It's quite often him that says, no, don't bother. When you compare that to a lot of other young players in particular, and actually quite often it's folks saying we should maybe send this one upstairs. And then Stokes turns to the 20-year-old as the voice of calm and reason, which I really like.
No, it's been great, and like I said, I hesitate to heap any sort of pressure on him, but it just looks very natural. There's no, you don't look at his action and think, oh my God, what's going on here. He does what comes naturally to him, and what comes naturally to him is very good. 3
50+ scores from 40 knocks from England's numbers 3 to 7 so far this series. Lots of starts. Is it just one of those things, a consequence of the quality of this India attack?
Yes, it is that. Had Harry Brook been available in the middle order, that might have been slightly different. Being a much more sort of fluid, softer-handed, quicker-footed player than somebody like Johnny Bairstow is incredibly handy in Indian conditions. But yeah, I mean that's been an issue, hasn't it? England's middle order having a real struggle getting in and making sort of big scores. I mean, again, none of these things are any new under the sun, are they? We're not talking about sort of this brand new way of playing cricket. It still stands that you have to make your top 6 have to make big runs, or 2 of them have to make big runs to put big totals on the board. And if you don't do that, you've got a big problem. Regardless of how well and how plucky your lower order are, top order need to make hundreds. And I suppose the great irony of it is that England in this series have made 3 brilliant ones, absolutely brilliant ones. Duckett ends up on the losing side, Rooties ends up being on the losing side, and only Ollie Popes, who hasn't scored a run since. That incredible innings in the third inning. If you'd have had a little bit more to go along with some of those exceptional, outrageous innings, and England might well have found themselves with some bigger totals to work with, and maybe would have nicked one of the other 2 games. But as it's been, India have, they had Bumrah being extraordinary in that second Test match. The spinners in tandem have been irresistible during the course of this one, and so life is not very easy for middle order players.
Would you be tempted to swap Folkes and Bairstow in the order, just in terms of how the 2 players play play with the tail?
That did, that always pops into your mind when the tail's in and you're after quick runs, isn't it? However, I think that the point still stands that there is, if you're batting at number 5 for England, as Johnny Bairstow is, that you're expecting guys to make hundreds without having to slog it with the tail, aren't you? It's certainly something worth considering in the middle of a game. You might go, what, it's a good idea to have a switch around here, but you'd still want your top 5 or 6 batters to be in position. And Folkes has done a terrific job at number 7 when he's been batting with guys above him, hasn't he? So it's. The bottom line is that your guys in the top 6 have to take more responsibility for scoring bigger runs, and that's the end of it. They haven't been able to do so, largely because India's spinners and bowling attack has been too good to allow them to do it, and also because there is all of the things that we said before the series still stand in terms of lack of cricket played. But not enough match time, all of those types of things. And whilst on the odd occasion that it hasn't mattered, players have played out their boots and done something brilliant, you haven't had a consistency throughout in order to put consistent runs on the board.
So you go.
Stokes had an interesting series with the bat, hasn't he? In that you've looked brilliant in that first innings of the series, and then feels like from then on, at least 1 out of every 2 times he's got out, he's sort of thrown his head back and almost laughed at how unplayable the ball that he got was. And so you wonder if it is just one of those things that he just happens to have copped a fair share of the good ones, or if there is possibly, especially in this test, I wonder, because you wonder how Root would have played those 2 ones that got Stokes out, and if there is just, if he might look back at it was just a little bit of frustration that,
the second innings, it wasn't the ball that got him out that was most interesting. It was that he basically got out 3 times in 13 balls.
Yeah.
Which is more significant. Anyway, without further ado, we've reached the part of the pod where we have to make the decision of who should be awarded the Charles Tyrwhitt moment of the test. Our friends at Charles Tyrrell are no strangers to helping men make difficult decisions when it comes to their wardrobe. Let's be honest, sometimes we could all do with a bit of direction when it comes to what outfit we need for that smart casual dress code. So check out charlestyrrell.com or visit one of their stores and they'll be able to help you look the part with their wide selection of shirts, trousers, blazers and knitwear. Don't forget to use the code SCORE to get our special Wisden discount of 20% off their full collection. Ben, it was in a losing cause, but as we said earlier in the test match, that was one of Joe Root's very best test hundreds.
Yeah, and for so many reasons as well. I mean, partly the sort of the build up to it, and I think for that you just need to go and listen back to any of our previous podcasts, basically with reverse scooping in the last game and questions about what exactly the role Root should play in this England side is, and then you can, if you want, see his innings in this game as a reaction to that. But more than that, I think it's kind of just an exceptional batter, pitch and conditions in like the absolute perfect way, basically instantly identifying a pitch that in the first session looked impossible to survive on, the way to survive on it and to score still at an okay rate as well. I mean, his slowest 100 under Stokes and McCullum, fine, but still scoring at 1 every 2 balls. That's perfectly acceptable. And yeah, just doing all the things that we know that Root is absolutely brilliant at, but also actually in conditions against the quality of attack that he hadn't quite done it before in his career, when he's got the big hundreds in India before those have been on flatter pitches, and when he's got maybe hundreds in Sri Lanka, those have been against not quite the same caliber of bowler. So this, in terms of those things, was 2 just massive boxes checked that you'd want to have checked as a great test batter. It's interesting, he said after play on that day that he didn't that he's not resolved to never play the reverse scoop again, so he might see it again at some point. But it was just...
Well, he said he was thinking about it when he was on 96.
Yeah, well, yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's funny that must always just be slightly in his head, but instead it's just that sort of that perfect off drive. And the celebration was amazing because Root kind of barely celebrates it, maybe partly because he feels he owes England a bit, partly because of just the effort he's put in. But Stokes is going absolutely crazy in the dugout. And then him and Root share a celebration where they put their little finger up, which is inspired by the Elvis Presley film, the one with Austin Butler from a few years ago, where Stokes had seen it and said he wanted his England side to be rock stars, and that was the celebration that reminded me of that. And actually, I found a quote from that time, which was Stokes saying that, Root saying that, yeah, Stokes, he wants it to be rock stars, and I sometimes find that hard to battle with sort of like the grumbly Yorkshireman within, and it seemed like he found a pretty good way to combine the two in this innings.
There's lots of chat around marginal LBWs in this test match and the quality of TV officiating as well. But a former captain of yours wants a camera in the DRS truck to prove there's nothing dodgy going on. Do you want a camera in the DRS truck?
No, I don't. I don't want a camera in the DRS truck. I'm going to try and find a way of saying this that is as polite as I possibly can. But poor old Joe Wilson is just, whenever there is some sort of shocker, whether it be on field or off field, he's never far away. I'll put it that way. He's like the driver that has seen thousands of crashes but has never had one himself. He's just kind of, he makes a lot of errors. He makes a lot of mistakes. However, one thing I would say is the thing that has prompted all of these calls for changes to DRS, to changes to umpires call and all the rest of it. I didn't see that there was anything wrong with Root's dismissal. I mean, with the naked eye, I was naked everywhere else, actually. So it was that early in the morning. Watching it.
Crucial detail.
Big detail. I thought it was out, and then when the line goes in, the ball seemed to pitch more than 50% of it within the tracking, and it's hitting the stumps. I couldn't understand what all the fuss was about.
Yeah.
And there had been one in the first innings, wasn't there, when Joe before Joe had sort of got going, he was on 19 or 20 or something, that Joe Wilson seemed to have found an inside edge somewhere that nobody else could see, and he was lucky to get away with one himself. Human error more often than not is the issue with the application of DRS, and I think the DRS system, particularly when you compare it to how it works in other sports, I still think it's the best way of doing it. It's not perfect, but it's a damn sight better than sort of removing all element of human error and margins from it, and making all of these calls absolutely black and white, because you can argue to the death one way or the other with quite a lot of these things, and having the umpires on the field still being central to that call, although one day it goes for you and one day goes the next, is still the safest and best way of going about it.
Yeah, I guess with the route marginal LBW, it's black and white for whether or not it's pitching in line. There's no umpires call.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So if there's 50.0001% of the ball that's pitching in line, it is
and
pitching in line.
that law had changed, didn't it, slightly, kind of to make it so that less of the ball has to pitch in line.
And when you look at it, it looks like about half the ball
just
is in
a
line.
bit over half the ball. I mean, I couldn't. Again, my mind was blown when I saw again all of the rows going on about it, because it just, there was enough of the ball pitching in line. It's hitting the stuff. In fact, if anything, the ball tracking made the ball look like it turned more than it actually did at one point. But again, like I said, naked eye, first look, I've given it out.
And also in a series where you're gonna have inconsistent bounce, you're gonna have pitches that turn more as the test goes on. People watching the tests from England who don't watch a lot of test cricket in India, are probably not actually used to this happening and there being so many marginal LBW calls. This is actually part and parcel of test cricket in India. Ben Butch mentioned the route call in the first innings. In the second innings today, actually, Jaiswal was given not out for one, and Wilson, as a TV umpire, looked to have found an edge that probably wasn't there. It was bat on pad rather than bat and ball. Some people want there to be specialist TV umpires. I sort of understand that, and I guess
I don't understand what that means, though.
I guess
I don't see what that means.
I think it's because, using Wilson as an example, I don't think umpires get promoted. I think you're looking for a different skill set in umpire. I think umpires get promoted not just for how accurate they are at giving LBW decisions, but also just like your character in managing difficult situations, your ability to step in, etc. Whereas as a television umpire, something that you don't do that often if you're an elite umpire, it is also just
over the course of a 5-match series, they all go outside and inside, don't they? Your group of 4 guys.
Yeah.
I mean, look,
you wouldn't eliminate
no,
mistakes,
of course you wouldn't, because people make good and bad decisions, don't they? I mean, that's the long and the short of it. Even the guys on field are specialist on field umpires. Doesn't make them immune from cocking it up. So again, I'm a little bit baffled. I hate to single out Joel, but the amount of games where if there is any sort of controversy over a decision that's been made correctly or incorrectly on or off the field, he generally seems to be on the wrong end of it. So, there's your human element, isn't it?
I suppose the thing with the technology and with specialist umpires or some people who have a bit more training or whatever, is that sometimes there can be almost a bit too much just like faith put into the complete end result without sometimes a bit of common sense or sense checking coming in. So with the ones that the 2 inside edge ones in this game, I can kind of see why he's said there's an edge there. And I can, if what you said was, well, you can't tell what the edge is, that's fine. I'd understand that decision. It's more that it's almost so binary, the process is like ball close to bat, spike on ultra edge, and then there's nothing else taken into account at all. You're not digging a bit deep. You're not seeing like what else could have made a sound at that point. And it looked in these cases it was bat on pad. There was also a case in the PSL actually last week where the ball tracking just made a complete error. Where they said the ball hit the pad was different to where it actually hit the pad, and you can just see it when you slow it down. And with like 5 seconds of just sense checking, looking at those 2 things in different spots.
But that doesn't require a whole new group of robo 4th umpires, does it? That just means that the protocol you're asked to you ask yourself another question. I mean, it's not that difficult.
It'd be a great job.
And you're
still
they're all pretty good. There's no better job.
Umpires.
There's no better job than a match referee, to be honest. I mean, that's the one we all aspire to.
Have you considered it?
Not yet. I'll see if I get censured for having a go at an ICC umpire.
I'm broadly with Butch. I think cricket, compared to other sports, Ben, has managed, probably accidentally managed technology really well. And also, I know we are now, but generally it doesn't. I listen to football podcasts, and sometimes I'm like, just talk about the fucking football. You know, like I know we've spent 5 minutes on it now, but actually, I think cricket's relationship with technology is decent.
It was a big talking point in the game. I mean, you'd be remiss not to bring it up. But again, I'm completely baffled as to why it's caused such a. The thing is that there are people that still have a sort of an agenda against any sort of technology in the game. You know, there are still those who cling on to the idea that the umpire's decision is final and the player shouldn't question it, or that you get the rough with the smooth. But we've been along this road for a very, very long period of time now, and the players, generally speaking, accept it in the same way that we used to accept it when you got a bad one in the old days. Sometimes the margins don't go in your favour, and a lot of the time they do. And when there is an absolute howler, you tend to be reprieved for that howler, which was something that none of us had the benefit of in the past, and it makes it makes the game appear fairer.
Yeah.
To argue about the margins of 0.1 of a millimeter and all these kind of stuff, it's a bit nuts when you think about just how many variables there are in a game of cricket.
Yeah. You're going to say something?
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, it's mostly just echoing that. I think the other way that cricket is well suited for technology is that with how the laws are set up and with that the game is, it's split into blocks of deliveries. It means you are deciding on a few matters of fact each time rather than stuff that is more vague, like in football, the definition of a foul. In rugby, sometimes they're like looking for mitigating circumstances and stuff. Whereas in cricket, it's like, has it hit something? Yes or no? Where has it hit that thing? Here or here? Like, obviously, you still get marginal calls within that, but you are deciding on a clear matter of fact.
And the system is there to kind of iron out the marginal calls, isn't it? It gives you that. It gives the on-field umpire the leeway to kind of make a decision, yes or no, knowing that, given the teams have enough reviews left, that they can correct that if they decide to. Whereas in football and in other games, there is this arbitrary kind of line where sometimes it just seems to be completely mad. Players' toenails offside and whatever, and a goal gets rubbed out, and you're kind of like, do we want to go down that road?
Well, that's
because what people are calling for is to go down that road. You take out any amount of margin for error whatsoever, and everything is a black and white fact. If the projection says the ball's going to hit the stumps, even if it's clipping the varnish off one side of it, you're gone. I would argue that wouldn't be a good thing.
Yeah,
well, that's the other thing with what Vaughan wants. I don't think anyone who's seen the offside lines being drawn on football, I don't think that any more sort of transparency in that process really helps with trusting in the final decision when you're like.
And also, if you had cameras in the DRS truck, if anything dodgy is going on, it's someone getting the click of the mouse slightly wrong on a computer. The camera is not going to show that.
It could be incredible ASMR content, just someone just sitting there silently, basically just clicking and occasionally taking like a sip of coffee or something.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is I can't work out how it would have happened, but I'm sure there are millions of ways that cricket really could have screwed up technology and made the game a worse viewing spectacle. And we've had a system that has broadly worked for 15 years, and I think we should be pretty grateful for that in comparison to other sports. Anyway, moving on to the cricket itself, they now have a break now the series has been decided before the fifth test at Dharamshala. But Alistair Cook mentioned a couple of interesting stats in the TNT coverage at the end. In recent first class games at the ground, seam averages about 23 and spin averages about 50. With that in mind, looking ahead, what changes would you make to that England team? Potential debut for Gus Atkinson, Mark Wood coming back. Ollie Robinson was rusty on his return. His speeds were down.
Yeah, I mean, it's still, I suppose the issue for England, they can kind of get away with it with spin because you've got Joe. Funnily enough, he didn't bowl very much in this test match. But when it comes to seam, if you wanted to play three seamers, then you've got a bit of an issue, haven't you? Then Joe has to be your second spinner. And I think given the way that Bashir has bowled, that you'd plug him in, he plays. But would England want to go with Anderson, Atkinson, and Wood? I'm sure Wood will play. I'm pretty sure of that. I would be I would be surprised if they moved away from 2 seamers and 2 spinners, 2 frontline spinners, because they don't have the leeway to do it without Ben bowling, unless of course he's suddenly gonna start bowling again for this Test match, which I doubt. So the only call really is whether or not they feel that Johnny gets pulled out the firing line and they give Dan Lawrence a go. But the fact that Johnny made 30 odd and kind of looked as though he was starting to get the hang of things a little bit, they'd probably stick with him. So I would imagine that there's not going to be a massive amount of difference apart from Wood for Robinson in the last one.
Ben, how do you see it?
Well, I guess the only caveat is that we haven't seen that pitch. Obviously, it's still a while away from being prepared, and sometimes test pitches for grounds India can be quite different to grounds used for first-class cricket in the Ranchi Trophy. So it might be they turn up there and think, like, actually, even though this has the reputation of being a pace-friendly ground, it's going to really help spin. I guess the other thing as well is that you make a good argument for if Stokes isn't fit, for why that doesn't give them the leeway to pick 3 seamers. But then if Stokes is fit to bowl, that lessens the need for 3 seamers because you've got a 3rd seamer there already.
England have only got Lawrence and Atkinson to bring in anyway.
Yes, good
point, they've got no other option. Everyone else has gone home.
Did you see Marcus Trescothick in full whites wearing a bib, running the drinks on?
Good lad.
He's only a bout of food poisoning away from.
But they've had the chef. No one's been sick, have they? No. You've had people leaving India tours for reasons other than intestinal health. This time they've had a chef out there.
Yeah.
Collingwood as well. You could have worse backroom staff if you for about a food poisoning.
Trez at slip and Collie at cover.
Yeah. Well, Trescothick was a pioneer, even at the very end of his career, getting on his knees at second slip for Somerset. There's a point today where Stokes was fielding at second slip off Bashir and he was so close. And I was sort of thinking, just get Trez on.
Yeah.
Get Trez on.
If only the series was level. Imagine Trez taking the catch to win it at Darussalam.
But again, you sort of talk about the series is over, etc., etc. But I still think, again, every Test match in itself is an event, and I'm sure that both teams will be looking at it as exactly that. Come back 3-2 would be a huge feather in England's cap, and India would be absolutely loathed. They want to stamp their authority over the course of the series. I think they've been a little bit surprised as to how nip and tuck it's been. Thus far at home, they've been given a lot more to think about than most touring teams give them, and they want to, they won't want to get Bazballed in the last one. So I think it's going to be a heck of a contest, and I think Ben's probably right. I think it will probably favour spin as the rest of them have done, despite the record of the ground.
Well, that's it for today. 3-1 India. Cheers, Butch. Cheers, Ben. We'll be back next week for a preview of the 5th Test.